If you've ever wondered how Iron Age communities survived on land that modern farmers would call exhausted, rocky, or outright useless, this story matters. For 4,000 years, across Europe, the Near East and parts of Africa, one humble crop quietly rewrote the rules of soil fertility. It didn't demand rich earth. It didn't strip nutrients and move on. It stayed year after year, improving the land while feeding people, animals, and entire local economies. That crop was the broad bean, also known as fava bean, and its role in ancient survival agriculture is far deeper than most histories admit. What makes this worth your time is not nostalgia, it's method. Iron Age farmers were not guessing. They were running long-term experiments with their lives on the line. And the fact that this crop kept appearing century after century on marginal soils tells us something modern systems still struggle to relearn. Why Iron Age soils were poor to begin with. By the Iron Age, much of Europe and the Mediterranean had already been farmed hard for millennia. Forests were cleared, topsoil eroded, and repeated grain planting drained nitrogen from the ground. Iron tools allowed deeper ploughing, which helped yields at first, but accelerated soil exhaustion. Many settlements were forced onto slopes, thin soils, and limestone-heavy ground where wheat and barley struggled. Yet these communities didn't abandon farming. They adapted. This is where broad beans enter the picture, not as a luxury crop, but as a survival crop. Archaeological finds from Iron Age storage pits in Britain, Gaul and the Levant consistently show charred fava beans alongside cereals. This wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. So, here's something interesting. How one crop managed to feed people and, at the very same time, feed the soil as well. Broad beans, you see, are part of the legume family, and legumes have this rather rare ability that, well, ancient farmers could spot just by observing, long before anyone had the science to explain it. Their roots actually host bacteria that pull nitrogen right out of the air and lock it into the soil. So every season a field grew beans. The ground ended up richer than before. Iron Age farmers, they noticed something quite practical. After beans, grain just seemed to grow better. Fields that had failed with barley could actually recover after a few seasons of legumes. This, in turn, led to those early crop rotation systems that didn't rely on any grand theory, just the results they could see. In some regions, beans were even planted on the worst plots first, sort of as a rehabilitation tool, you might say. Now, if you're after a modern application, the method is actually pretty straightforward. Plant legumes on depleted soil for, say, 1 to 3 seasons. Just don't remove the roots at harvest. Let them rot right there in place. Then you follow with cereals or vegetables that really need nitrogen. This isn't just some sustainable branding, by the way. It's ancient soil engineering, plain and simple. Why did broad beans thrive where other crops failed? Well, broad beans tolerate cold, poor drainage, and heavy soils better than most grains. They can germinate in cool conditions and, push roots deep into compacted ground. Iron Age farmers in northern Europe often planted them early, using them as a hedge against grain failure. If wheat failed, beans still produced calories. Nutritionally, they mattered even more. Broad beans are dense in protein, fibre and minerals. For communities with limited access to meat, they were honestly essential. Dried beans stored well, travelled easily, and could be eaten whole, ground into flour, or fed to animals. This made them a cornerstone of resilience, not just agriculture. You can still use this today in marginal gardens or homesteads. If your soil is clay-heavy, compacted or low input, broad beans are one of the fastest ways to produce food while rebuilding fertility without fertilizers. Iron Age farming systems were, quieter but definitely smarter. There's a tendency to underestimate ancient farming because, it lacked machinery. That's a mistake. Iron Age farmers actually managed risk through diversity. Beans, for example, reduced dependence on single crops. They stabilized yields across bad years. They also supported livestock indirectly by improving pasture when fields were rotated back to grazing. In Britain, evidence suggests some fields followed a cycle of beans grain, then fallow grazing. Each phase served a function. Beans rebuilt soil. Grain harvested calories. Grazing returned manure. This loop could run for generations without collapse if managed carefully. For modern survivalists, this is directly applicable. A small plot rotating legumes, starch crops and rest periods can honestly outperform intensive systems in the long run, especially when external inputs disappear. So, why did this crop vanish from modern narratives? Well, broad beans didn't actually disappear from farming, but they did lose their status. Industrial agriculture started to prioritize high-yield cereals and chemical fertilizers. They replaced biological fertility. Beans became known as poor food, or just animal feed, or maybe something for niche cuisine. The knowledge wasn't lost, though. It was just sort of ignored. Now, as soils degrade again, the same solution quietly reappears under new names, like regenerative agriculture. Iron Age farmers, honestly, would recognize it immediately. Now, what this really teaches us about long-term survival is rather profound. The real lesson here isn't just the bean itself. It's, the mindset behind it. Ancient farmers, you see, chose crops that worked with the land, not against it. They placed more value on consistency than on squeezing out the maximum yield every season. They understood, quite wisely, that soil wasn't a resource to simply burn through, but a partner, something to maintain and care for. If you're planning for resilience, whether it's for historical reenactment, off-grid living, or genuine long-term preparedness, this is really foundational knowledge. Food that actually improves its own growing conditions is honestly pretty rare. Ignoring this, that's a modern mistake. If this sort of grounded, evidence-based history matters to you, then do subscribe to Iron Age Instincts, share this with someone who still thinks ancient farmers were primitive, and, help keep these lessons alive. The past solved problems we're facing again today, and I'd say it deserves to be studied seriously. The Prepper Historian.